Dear students, I am JB. Welcome all of you to this video lecture. Today I will discuss a very interesting and adventurous story, The Tragedy of Pondicherry Lodge. This is written by a very famous writer and medical doctor, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. So before going to the story, let's see the characters of the story so that we can understand the story more easily. Here you see Mr. Thaddeus Sholto is the main character here. Next character Mr. Holmes. He is a friend of Mr. Thaddeus Sholto. And Miss Morrison, she is also a friend of Mr. Thaddeus Sholto. After that, here you see Mr. Bartholomew Sholto. He is the brother of Mr. Thaddeus Sholto. And next, Mac Murdo. He is the caretaker of the Pondicherry Lodge. And the last character you see here, Mrs. Burnstone. She is also a caretaker of the Pondicherry Lodge. Now, let's go to the main story. Actually, the Tragedy of Pondicherry Lodge is a story of an adventure of some friends. In this story, the main character, Mr. Thaddeus Sholto, and some of his friends, Mr. Holmes and Miss Morrison, had gone to an adventurous trip. And at the very beginning of the story, there is a description of the atmosphere. It was nearly 11 o'clock at night, and that time a warm wind was blowing from the westward, and at the same time there were heavy clouds in the sky, and the clouds were moving slowly. In such weather, it was clear to see for some distance with the occasional moonlights. But Mr. Thaddeus Sholto thought it was not enough to see the way clearly. So he took one lamp from the carriage and continued his walking. As it was 11 o'clock night and they required a shelter. So finally they reached to the Pondicherry Lodge. As they reached there, they looked at the door and it was iron clamped. Here, iron clamped, it means the door was held by iron clamps. Then Mr. Thaddeus Sholto knocked at the door, and the caretaker Mac Murdo cried with a rough voice from within the lodge, "Who is there outside?" Mr. Thaddeus Sholto said his name, and then the caretaker opened the door and said that, "It's okay, I can allow you to get into the lodge, but I can't allow your friends inside." Here you see, why did the caretaker say this? Actually, the caretaker Mac Murdo knew Mr. Thaddeus Sholto, but he did not know his friends, as well as he had no instruction from his owner to allow any unknown persons inside. So he said that, "I can allow you, but I cannot allow your friends." And here we can see the caretaker Mac Murdo was a very short-heighted man, and when he opened the door, he had a lantern in his hand. After hearing this, Mr. Thaddeus Sholto was very much surprised, and he said that, "No, it is not like that, because last night I talked to my brother Bartholomew Sholto that I was going to come in the Pondicherry Lodge and going to stay there with my friends." Here we can come to know that Mr. Bartholomew Sholto was the brother of Mr. Thaddeus Sholto, and he was the owner of this Pondicherry Lodge. Now in this situation, everybody in the group was very sad and tensed. It was really an unexpected obstacle for all of them. Mr. Thaddeus Sholto became very angry, and he said that it's okay for us, but it's too bad because there is a young lady in the group, and it's practically very difficult for a lady to stay on the public road for the whole night. In such helpless situation, everybody was very tensed, and they were standing outside. Standing there, they noticed that there was no light inside the lodge, and there was only one light that was coming only from the moon. Then Mr. Thaddeus Sholto said to his friends that there is something wrong, because yesterday night I informed my brother that my friends and I would come and stay here, but suddenly what happened? Even there is no light inside. It was quite shocking to Mr. Thaddeus, and he was in doubt. There must be something wrong with Mr. Bartholomew Sholto. Then Mr. Holmes asked Mr. Thaddeus that, in this way does your brother take care of the lodge? He doesn't know who is coming and what is happening here in this lodge? Then Mr. Thaddeus said, yes, he was the favorite son of my father, and my father may have told him more than he ever told me. Then suddenly Mr. Holmes said to Mr. Thaddeus, look at the window, I can see a glint of light there. Mr. Thaddeus Sholto replied that it is not the room of my brother, it is the room of another caretaker of this lodge, and her name is Mrs. Barnston. Just after this, Mr. Thaddeus said, if you don't mind, please wait here for some time, so that at least I can talk to Mrs. Barnston for permission. During this conversation, suddenly they got a horrible voice from the Pondicherry Lodge. And everybody was shocked, and Mr. Thaddeus said, that is the voice of the old lady caretaker, Mrs. Barnston. And then he said, please you all wait here and let me see what happened inside, whether Mrs. Barnston is okay or not. As Mr. Thaddeus Sholto opened the door of the lodge, he noticed that in front of him there was one tall-heighted lady standing, the old woman caretaker, Mrs. Barnston. And she was very glad to see Mr. Thaddeus Sholto, and continuously she started saying, I am so glad you have come, I am so glad you have come, Mr. Thaddeus sir. And at the same time she was stepping backwards, and suddenly what happened? She entered into a room and locked herself in the room. On the other hand, Mr. Holmes and Miss Morrison were standing outside and looking at the desolate ground, and they were so impressed with the ground. Miss Morrison said, what a strange place. I saw this similar place in Ballarat. And she also said that this is one of the places which treasure seekers have been searching for the past 6 years. Suddenly, the door of the Pondicherry Lodge opened, and Mr. Thaddeus Sholto came running out of the lodge. And he was so much scared. He said that there is something wrong with my brother Bartholomew Sholto. Then finally at that moment, Mr. Thaddeus, Mr. Holmes and Miss Morrison, all of them entered into the Pondicherry Lodge. And at first they went to the room of the caretaker, Mrs. Barnston. And they saw that the caretaker, Mrs. Barnston, was pacing up and down with a scared look. As she was very nervous, she was moving here and there and picking fingers. But when Mrs. Barnston saw Miss Morrison, she became a little relaxed, and she started giving blessing to Miss Morrison. She said, God bless your sweet calm face. When Mrs. Barnston felt quite relaxed, she said that there is something I want to tell you, that your brother, Mr. Bartholomew Sholto, has locked himself in a room since morning. And all day I have been waiting and knocking at the door, but he is not responding me at all. She also said that even I peeped through the keyhole of the door, but there was no response. Finally, she said that I have seen your brother Bartholomew in joy and sorrow for the last 10 years, but I never saw him in such condition before. After saying this all, she said to Mr. Thaddeus that you must go up and check the condition yourself, whether he is okay or not. Then Mr. Thaddeus Sholto went off and checked everything, and finally he noticed that Mr. Bartholomew Sholto was dead. So at last we came to know that Mr. Bartholomew was not responding because he was no more. He was dead. And here this chapter ends. Actually, this is not a complete story. This is an extract of the famous novel The Science of the Four. And this novel was written by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. So I hope you have understood this chapter very well. If you still have any confusion, let me know through the WhatsApp group. I'll definitely reply you. Bye.